The government has a lot of control in the media.
Mark Carney, who is out in Montreal today announcing that if he's elected, he would like to increase the funding for CBC Radio Canada. He says he'd raise the funding by about $150 million immediately.
They're outright lies. There is no way you're going to grow your economy. Or I think recently he said Canada is going to be an energy powerhouse because of the energy transition. There is no way you're going to do that if you have net zero.
We need to ultimately get to a point where every financial decision is taking climate change into account, the impact on the transition.
So it's been a colossal failure, right? Horrific for people of the world. Mark Carney has his hand in everything. You're talking about global think tanks, leading universities, leading, financial institutions.
It's really about looking for and at transition plans from all companies and backing those who are part of the solution and taking capital away from those who are part of the problem.
He's far more dangerous because his influence is so extensive.
Well, Miss Desiree, I don't know why I like to call you that. I just think it sounds cute. Desiree Fixler, thank you so much for joining us today. You have recently blown up on the internet by all accounts, especially here in Canada.
Yes. Look, I knew I was saying something pretty direct, pretty hardcore. I felt it was important, as I have experience in working in Mark Carney's circles, and given your very important election, it was important that I speak up. And so, yes, I definitely underestimated how kind of viral it would go. But I understood I was being super direct.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's funny going through your profiles and stuff. You're a pretty big proponent for free speech, as most people should be. And that's definitely, I think you struck a chord with a lot of Canadians who have felt like we don't actually really know anything about this man outside of what the media is telling us and outside of what he is telling us. And there's a lot of things here that don't add up and a lot of things that actually relate at large to your own background. So do you want to just kind of recap a little bit? First and foremost, I'm actually quite curious, how old were you when you got involved in banking, I suppose, at that level, though? How old were you?
It's funny. I mean, I started in banking at 21, but that was 1994. And back in the day, it was very much a meritocracy. Strangely enough, and others will confirm this, I rose up pretty quickly. Back then, you had more of a speaking up and speaking out culture than you do today. So you might not have, it was pretty brutal, right? And everyone just spoke their mind. But I love that. I love that I can get to the table, and a fairly senior table, and just say, you're wrong, or, the markets are going in this direction. I think we have to, move here. Today, you don't have that ability. So again, 1994, I do start. I forge a fairly straightforward investment banking career. And then it all changes 10 years in, and I get involved in ESG. And ultimately get my dream job, I think it's my dream job, in 2020 as the Chief Sustainability Officer at Deutsche Bank's asset manager. And the asset manager is called DWS. And this asset manager has almost $1 trillion under management. And I'm a firm believer that, wow, we can do so much good with this money. We can invest money for great financial returns, but also social and environmental impact. Now, keep in mind, I have the same job as Mark Carney does when he joins Brookfield as the head of ESG. He's also the chairman of the of the company, but he is head of ESG and impact investing. This is very similar time in 2020, and I'm at Deutsche Bank's asset manager.
ESG in particular is something that a lot of Canadians, a lot of North Americans actually, it'd be a word thrown around here and there, but I don't think that people really started to understand exactly what this is and also what are appearingly the harms of it. Until there were some whistleblowers such as yourself and other people as well, just doing more research and thinking something here doesn't actually really add up. So out of curiosity as well, what exactly was it that caused you to say, you get that feeling in your gut, you're like, this doesn't feel right. People are being misled. This isn't true. What's going on here? And I need to speak out. Like, what was that pivotal moment for you?
So I was in my job, and at the time, it was a boom market in ESG. Keep in mind, COVID is in the backdrop. There's a lot of social unrest. We're coming out. I mean, we're fully out of the wake of the great financial crisis, but Wall Street is still desperately trying to rebrand itself. And here's a great opportunity. Wall Street can rebrand itself as a force for good. Again, that combination of doing good and doing well, financial returns and environmental and social impact, saving the planet and the people, right? So that is in the backdrop. And at this point, I am a true believer. But what I clock when I'm at Deutsche Bank is the marketing spiel is totally disconnected from the reality. So externally, we're saying that, our investment portfolio is by and large taking, climate action. It is addressing inequality in society. Here's the reality. The investment portfolio was invested in tech giants like Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Alphabet, right? Great companies, great financial returns, in fact, but these companies aren't saving the planet. Mm-hmm. And so you start clocking the disconnect and you start seeing, wow, there's a massive gap between what my CEO, my boss, is saying to the investors and to shareholders and the internal reality. And we're saying that ESG, sustainability, leads to greater profitability. It is better risk management. Nothing of the sort. Because at this time, right, you're starting to get some data coming in. And you're saying, wait, hang on a second. We're not aligned with the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, right? This is actually a marketing scheme to pretend that we're saving the world, right? So it's very much virtue signaling. Mm-hmm. And we're rebranding regular way products in order to overcharge investors. And so I clock, this is just a ripoff. It's a ripoff scam. And again,
was that a scary realization for you to come to when it's almost like you kind of realize that everything you were led to believe is not true? And worse than that, by that realization, you're acknowledging that what you've been telling people, what you've been promoting is also not true. How did that make you feel?
Horrible and scared, actually, at the time. But it was my job. It was my job to speak up. And I kept it internal to say, okay, hang on a second. We've gotten ahead of ourselves. Let's restate things. Let's knock off this hyperbole and exaggeration. At the time, I knew there was fraud being committed. But I did believe maybe there's a better way and there's a more honest way to be sustainable. Maybe we're lying to the public, right? To rip off clients. It's not until, so my story is that I do raise these concerns to my CEO and say, hey, hang on a second, we're lying. Our investment portfolio is not saving the planet and the people. This is greenwashing. And rather than address the concerns, I actually get fired. And I get spit out of the system. Now, I decide to speak up and speak out, and I address these. What had happened with there was a public smear campaign, and I address it in the public forum.
Of course there was.
But it wasn't until I'm now in the public forum, and like the penny drops. It's actually greenwashing is pervasive across Wall Street. Everyone's doing this. And I throw myself into working with regulators, think tanks, academia, and other financial institutions to tackle greenwashing. That is at the time where I realized, no one wants to tackle greenwashing. No one cares if ESG or sustainability has any effect. It is at this point for them a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex. The stakes are high. People are making so much money. They don't want to burst the bubble. And of course, I have just, experienced the fraud front row at one company. I'm now in all of these. I'm at the World Economic Forum and clocking, wow, these folks here, this elite, it is like what I've heard, this elite bubble, totally removed from reality, not caring about the plight of ordinary citizens, not even caring about the environment. But they're making so much money and they're praised, right? They're taking center stage at whether it's Davos or all those COP meetings. They're getting promoted. Their salaries and bonuses are going up in addition to side gigs. And they get to walk the stage with this moral superiority cloak. That's when I really go at it and speak up much more and just call out this fraud.
Your story certainly resonates deeply with mine. I come from a traditional media background, and I worked in the industry for 11 years. And then one day it was kind of like, I can't do this anymore. And it's not even like it's these terrible things of wasting everybody's money. More so it's that I'm not able to just say what I think and what I know to be true. And we have to maintain this image, and everything I do is for this image. And it just became so crippling after a long period of time there. But, one question I've often had is people who are involved, the UN, also World Economic Forum, big organizations like that somehow have, gosh darn, so much control in policies around the world, is whether or not they actually believe in what they're doing. And Mark Carney is an interesting example because his wife, Diana Fox Carney, has been involved in this for quite some time. She has been influencing the Canadian government on climate and DEI-related policies since as far back I could find a paper trail, 2013. Mark Carney is very involved in that, and their daughter, Cleo, is also very involved in that now. And it makes me wonder, do people actually believe in this stuff? Do you get to a point where you're in an echo chamber where you truly do believe that carbon credits are the future, that you can wipe out automobiles by 2030? Do you really believe that? And if you do, how do you reconcile the global data of emissions and carbon in the atmosphere, if that's what you're going to be going off of, with how little of an impact the trillions of dollars that's spent into all of your organizations and investments is costing? So long-winded question there, but overall, do you believe that people like Mark Carney, not necessarily him directly, I'm not going to ask you to speculate on him directly here, but just people in those positions, are there any of them that actually believe it at that point when they are that level of elite class?
Absolutely not. So to your point, I didn't work directly with Mark. I worked with his team. So I can tell you without a doubt, there is total disregard from the outcomes and results of all of these Green Deal policies, ESG regulations, climate control policies. Total disregard. Again, these people always focus on the intentions, the aspirations. Never when I would raise, because of course, now we're today, 2025, we have so much economic data. And I really think, it's important to look at Europe. Europe has been a leader in this field. How is Europe doing? How is Germany in particular doing? And
Mm-hmm.
again, you can look at productivity measures. You can look at GDP per capita. You can look at innovation, R&D spend, right? And innovation meaning like patents registered, right? And what you see is Europe flatlining.
Yeah.
You look at energy costs, look at national security, right? These are all the affordability crisis, these are all very troubling issues. And Europe is struggling right now. By the way, so is the UK. Again,
Mm-hmm.
both leaders in this net zero movement, which Mark Carney is the ringleader. So, in my experience, when you were looking at the data, let's just look at energy prices, and let's just let's look at it on a relative basis. Let's look at like the cost of retail and industrial energy costs, and let's contrast Europe versus like Germany versus the US, or the UK versus the US. You're
Yeah.
looking at energy costs that are 2 to 3 times more expensive there. So, what are companies doing? Companies are pulling out production and moving to regions that have more affordable energy. So, you're talking about it wasn't just that ESG or net zero were policies that were fleecing investors. It's the societal harm. And the societal harm is creating expensive energy, creating tremendous inflation, um, job losses because companies are moving to other areas, and then separately, now that was the climate, but now let's look at the social impact of
Yeah.
the subcomponent of ESG. Let's look at DEI, right? And that again, grave, like horrific results. Um, the premise of DEI is that we need to reflect society, have equal opportunity, and ensure there's diverse thinking, right? The
Which is funny because there's no diverse thinking in that at all. It is you follow or you're a bad person.
correct. It is DEI, absolutely. DEI has led to a greater echo chamber, and it has led to more groupthink. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, without a doubt. Oh, crap, I just had a question and then I forgot it. It's fine. Here we go. So you mentioned the UK, and I've actually been, I should say, studying, I guess, some of the social turmoil that has taken place in the UK in recent years. And it's just heartbreaking to know what some people are dealing with there, and to have a government who simply doesn't seem to care. They don't seem to want to listen to you. And they seem to be completely okay with just driving everything that your ancestors fought for into the ground, which is just heartbreaking. But I'm wondering, particularly with Mark Carney, because he has, there was a big thing where he was selected as leader by, 0.4% of the population. And then on his first business trip, rather than go to the United States, which they absolutely took note of, he went to go visit Keir Starmer. And it makes me wonder sometimes, because Keir Starmer is also very involved in many of the same ideologies and policies that Mark Carney promotes.
Yeah.
What exactly do you think is the motive behind that? And I guess that kind of leads in as well to Mark Carney has spoken at length about this anti-American sentiment, and he's mocked the US. He has pinned Canadians against, or Canadian liberals and New Democrats against conservative parties. Oh, they're just like Trump. And it's just this really high school-esque thing that has actually really taken hold. And it makes me wonder a lot. You're mocking the United States and you're cozying up to Europe and to the UK. Is stuff like this, do you think that it's actually about policy differences, or is there perhaps some sort of a free market resistance to ESG control that the United States is a threat almost to them?
Yes, I do. Mark Carney is seizing, he never lets a good crisis get away.
When you're in a crisis, my experience, what you need to do is distinguish between what you can change and what you can't. And it's not really a big insight, but I don't think at 78 we can change Donald Trump.
He loves that, the opportunity of crisis, whether it's Brexit, his manufactured fear-mongering on climate catastrophe. And in this case, I do believe he's also manufacturing a crisis to win votes on the American enemy and the threat of U.S. tariffs. Well, look, we had yesterday, so, tariffs are on pause right now. And for Canada, at the end of the day, America wants to grow its economy. Americans do not perceive Canadians as enemies. I firmly believe that, things will be figured out. And we will both, resume a very, friendly and growing trading relationships as long as, I'm hoping Mark Carney doesn't get elected and he becomes antagonistic. It's the craziest thing to run to Europe. Europe is flatlining. What is Europe going to do for Canada?
Thank you for saying that, because that was one of my very first comments when all of that happened. The first thing I thought is, wait a second, have you been paying attention to what's happening in Europe? They're Canada, but maybe 5 years ahead if we continue on this path. And that's where you're going for your partnerships and allies. What? What?
It's crazy. Now, look, I think they're all, most European leaders, maybe not, Giorgia Meloni, but the others, in charge of Macron or the new German leadership, Friedrich Merz, Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, they're all like peas in a pod.
Yeah.
The difference, though, I would say is this. Those other leaders are local. Mark Carney is different. Remember that. Mark Carney, while some Canadians might not be familiar, of course, he's been on the global stage for an awful long time. And folks in the UK, we are familiar, right? So he primed the pump for the inflation crisis. He was the one that started all this fear-mongering on climate risk. There was a feeling in the UK when he was governor of Bank of England that he was more focused on climate risk and DEI than actual financial stability. Mark Carney, let's not forget, has his hand everywhere. These tentacles are global. After he leaves the Bank of England, he jumps ship, and I think folks know, to Brookfield. But remember, he's also taking seats, advisory seats or non-executive seats at Bloomberg, Stripe, PIMCO. He's got seats at, think tanks, the World Economic Forum and others, academia, Oxford, Harvard, INSEAD. And then, of course, which was the most harmful, he's an advisor at the UN, for climate risk. And he spearheads a climate alliance called GFANZ, the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And again, he very much bullies the world into adopting net zero, which again, in my opinion, has led to crazy energy prices and energy vulnerability that emboldened Putin to invade the Ukraine. I firmly believe weak Germany that banned nuclear, that banned fracking, that was married to this green ideology, was so dependent on fossil fuel from Russia that what was Germany going to do? What was Europe going to do? Right. So I really think that this movement encouraged Putin to do what he did, which led to, again, catastrophic.
Well, certainly gave him the financing to do so, right? In those regions.
Yes. Previously, because they were all hooked on, Russian oil and gas. Absolutely. Going back to Mark Carney, right? He's of a different class. When you're looking at Keir Starmer or again, Germany or France leadership, remember, Mark Carney has his hand in everything. You're talking about global think tanks, leading universities, leading, financial institutions, right? Multilateral institutions like the UN. For me, he's far more dangerous because his influence is so extensive.
You mentioned some things about different investments and whatnot, and it's rather fascinating here in Canada to see the way that the mainstream media, which is predominantly, and this is something that gets tossed around so much, but our mainstream media, we're not like the United States where just anybody can go and start a new radio show and it'll be on the public network because you paid for it. That's not how Canada works. We have a lot of rules and regulations when it comes to broadcasting in this country. And the mainstream media predominantly is funded at large by the federal Liberal Party. And they are funded at large by being able to prop up and kind of turn a blind eye to things that anybody with some integrity as a journalist would see, and this doesn't make sense, and they don't do that. And one thing that has happened with Mark Carney is he has all of these conflicts of interest, clearly, just given the things that he pushes, right? He's involved with Brookfield Asset Management. While, yes, he has taken a step back because he wants to be prime minister, that job is still there for him whenever that is over. They get holdings in things like modular housing, which he has recently started pushing out. They made an over $1 trillion investment in modular housing in the last couple of years. He's very involved with ESG infrastructure, carbon offset markets, the carbon credits has got to be the most outrageous one I've ever heard of. But it's all of these industries that ever so coincidentally benefit from government subsidies and handouts for the green movement. And I'm curious for you, do you believe that all of this is appearing to be a clear-cut conflict of interest that should have far more attention to it than it is?
100%. I would even go so far as to say that they're outright lies.
There is two things happening at the same time. One is there is an energy transition towards lower carbon energy that is underway around the world. I'll give you one example. Last year, 90% of the energy investment, the power investment in the world, was clean energy. 90% around the world. That tells you where the trajectory is. But of course, it's different from where the world is in terms of consumption of oil and gas, conventional energy. Our opportunity is to have the lowest risk, which we do because it's Canada, the lowest cost through investment, and amongst, if not the lowest, amongst the lowest carbon conventional energy. That is the opportunity we have here in Alberta and across Canada, and it's for the investments for that. So what we're recognizing as part of this is both that clean energy is going to be increasingly important to competitiveness. We have enormous opportunities in this country on that. We can build that out. We can drill down on that if anyone wants to. But at the same time, we want to dominate the market for conventional energy. And in order to do that, in the long term, it needs to be lower carbon since you asked the question about climate, on Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions. That's the opportunity that's here. That's what we're helping to unlock. We're looking to work with industry in order to do it. And the great people behind me and those they represent are going to help build it.
There is no way you're going to grow your economy. Or I think recently he said Canada is going to be an energy powerhouse because of the energy transition. There is no way you're going to do that if you have net zero, right? If you're aligned to net zero, if you have a ban on further fossil fuel drilling, right, and further pipelines, there is no way. That leads only to that you're going down one path, and that's the path of unaffordable energy, and that is a path of a shrinking economy. So no, renewable energy is without a doubt more expensive. Carbon capture and storage, and other research and development, investments, whether it's battery storage or green hydrogen. Again, no, it is at this point not proven technology, and so The only way, if let's just say folks believe in climate change and believe in the future, right, the medium or long term, it might be a problem. The only way you can address it, and again, ensure that you have a prospering economy, is to ensure that your citizens have access and companies have access to affordable energy that is powered by good old-fashioned fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a long time until we have an alternative to that that's cheaper. So there is, like, again, you just look at the UK, you just look at Germany, and you can see, in particular, Germany, right? Germany is likely going on its third year of a shrinking economy, largely because of net zero. So I wouldn't, just say that, Carney is looking at, like, kind of like exaggerating on the marketing element of net zero or the Green Deal. I would say he's outright lying.
It's funny you say that, because I think this took place yesterday, or perhaps it was the day before, where Mark Carney, we have a bill here. It's called Bill C-69, and It is essentially introduced by the Liberal government to ensure that no new pipelines are built, more or less. And he has doubled down, saying that they will not rescind that bill. That bill is staying in place. And there was somebody who said, how are we supposed to grow our economy if you refuse to allow us to build pipelines to get our product out to either sea, and you're keeping us dependent on the US, and you say that it's really bad to be dependent on the US, but then you're blocking any attempt, and just listening to him word vomit his way through that answer about having it make sense, because it simply doesn't make sense, right? And, I don't think there's anybody that wants to live in a smog city by any stretch, but how can you, in the same sentence, admit that Canada's forests alone absorb the carbon that we emit, which is helping them grow, and then also tell us that, we got to really take down these emissions, so we got to put caps on everything? It's just ridiculous. It's so ludicrous.
Of course it is. Number one, without a doubt, C-69 will lead to a shrinking economy. There's no doubt, right? So, like, C-69 is again, like in the UK enshrined net zero into law. Like, it's impossible. You need access to affordable energy. I would say this. I see it as outright theft. Oil and gas, like, these are national assets. The people of Canada own it. And the people of Canada should decide whether or not they want access to affordable energy and they want to grow their economy. And absolutely, like, the United States is benefiting from this. Like, C-69 is a benefit to the US, right? Yeah. We get the offtake, right? It would be very different from the US if suddenly it's in comp because you have other pipelines, like, going into other regions, right? But that is really an existential, it is a foundational question for the people of Canada. Canada is so natural resource rich, and the people own that. Not some guy that was, like, sitting in, like, the UK, identifying as European and being part of the World Economic Forum, like, or the UN, right? No, Canadians need to vote, and the government needs to be honest about the cost of C-69 and then give it to the voters to decide whether or not they want to pay 2 to 3 times more for the price of electricity because of it. And so that I think that I just think that that's outright horrific, authoritarian government theft. People, like, that is, like, this is a question for the citizens of Canada. And I know he's not being honest about the cost benefit analysis. And there is no way, and you can see this in Europe. Europe and the UK promised, affordable energy, promised more jobs, this whole energy transition, and economic growth. They totally are flatlining, right? So that's where I struggle, is that because I'm in the room with these folks, the results are in, right? We're almost 5 years into, like, net zero. We can see the economic data coming out. And And interestingly, we can also see where carbon emissions are going. So after all of this effort, the trillions mobilized by Mark Carney, into ESG strategies and into clean technology, clean energy, emissions are going up. So it's been a colossal failure, right? Like horrific for people of the world, right? But it's also not driven down emissions because guess what? Like emissions are being driven by China and India.
Yeah.
So like if Mark Carney is really dedicated to the Green Deal, like let him move to China or India and petition those governments. Why is he in Canada?
That leads me to another question, which is, what is the real end game behind these global climate frameworks? It's clearly not about actually reducing emissions meaningfully. Otherwise, we would be able to show that there was some positive ground being made there. Is it about power? Is it about control? Is it strictly lucrative? Is it about surveillance? Because now there's all of these other things about, misinformation and disinformation. Every single video I post about climate change online gets a little tag from the UN, a definition of what climate change is on it automatically. But let's say even if it is about any of the above, power control, perhaps more surveillance even, or just money, at the end of the day, they're bound to run out of that. Are they not? Because what is the goal between impoverishing your country? How does that benefit you in the long run? Or is that so far out of sight that they don't even really care?
They don't care. Fear wins votes. So, Mark Carney just, he's never been elected, right? This is an appointee, right? And he's just climbed himself up through networking and schmoozing and faking like a legacy in his CV. I'm not sure the people of like United Kingdom are proud that he was their governor of the Bank of England. But again, like it, in theory, kind of looks like, this was a big guy on the stage. But again, he wasn't elected, right? And again, he, prior to moving into the world of politics, he was just a corporate guy at Goldman Sachs. So I do think that the movement and the reason why the elite are not like, giving up on this is because, to what you've just said, it's power and it's money. So you scare people and you say there is a climate catastrophe. He'll win some votes on this. You scare people and say America's a threat, and the U.S. tariffs are the reason why we're in economic hardship or decline. It's like, are you kidding? Like Trump just got in. Like your economic decline is because of the Trudeau government. Look at the economic data. But you can scare people because it's new information. And, to your point, which is very common in Europe as well, the government has a lot of control on the media. And so a message is being put out that, there is this climate catastrophe. And then lo and behold, Mark Carney is there to say, like, I can save everything. The other point I would make is it's extremely lucrative. So remember, each of these, the salary for these, advisory gigs are six figures. Mark Carney also benefits from being, asked to speak, at, conferences and, private events. Those are likely six-figure, events. So when you add up all this stuff, in addition to your salary, people are making a fortune off of fear-mongering on climate change. And again, a lot of corporations, want to rebrand themselves as being fair and focused on diversity. And so again, you make a bomb off pushing this agenda as well. And then you're in a power seat, and you want to maintain that. And that's where you squash dissent. And I think, everything about Mark Carney is telling when you read his op-ed after the truckers' rebellion in Canada.
Oh.
And, And you see what's happening in Europe, where thousands of people are being arrested, for just like online posts and memes. It's crazy what's happening there. I'm very concerned about that. So, Europe and the UK is definitely moving in the wrong direction. And I firmly believe that Mark Carney will do the same for Canada. Not only will he further economic policies that shrink the economy, but he will move again to silence dissent and increase censorship. That is so scary. And that's really the undoing of democracy.
That kind of perfectly leads me into my next question. What would you say is Mark Carney's ultimate goal with all of this? The way that I've wrapped my head around it is he went from being somebody who affected and illegally lobbied, I guess you could say, or unregistered. He lobbied governments for policy control or policy changes, that benefit him financially. And this is well documented. And now he is the policy maker. That's kind of how I have been able to rationalize that. But I'm curious as to what your take is of the motive really behind all of this, and leaving behind all of those cushy jobs to now be the Prime Minister of Canada. Why?
Because it's a dream job. He's a leader of a country. He's on the world stage. Before these were all appointed positions. Now he's firmly in charge. He is in charge of the kingdom, and I very much see him. I mean, again, please don't, I haven't heard it from his lips, but I've been around his people. There is an absolute detachment and disregard for the plight of people. In fact, so much so, I would say that when I bring up, the affordability crisis, that right now the key driver, in elections that happen in 2024, what's on everyone's mind is the price of food and it's, housing. It's, it is about, really hurting to have a decent standard of living. It is the economy. And when you bring this up with his circle, there is a disregard, who cares? I remember being in a WEF, a World Economic Forum meeting, and I said, electricity prices are sky high. It's, we have to address the affordability crisis. Voters are not, a key issue is not climate risk. So stop it. The key issue, if we're talking about global challenges for people, which you're purporting to care about, it is, economic, it's their economic plight. And people, everyone's hurting right now when you go to the supermarket. And I remember someone firing right back at me and saying Desiree, why do you care? Who, you can afford that. I'm well, actually, I'm no longer on that corporate ladder, so no, not necessarily. That's not the point. We're here, we're pushing policy in the name of the people, and you've just disregarded the people. Did you lose your mind? And that is that elitism, and that's very. I know I used to always hear about this, they called the World Economic Forum, this elite bubble. It's not until you're there that you realize these people not only don't give a shit about people, they're irritated by the people. I think Carney wants this. He wants people to kiss his ring. That's what he wants. It's a power play. It is the ultimate job to be a leader of a country. He's finally in total control, because before, he was always a chairman, an advisor, an appointee, bank governor. He runs the whole shebang.
So it's total pride and ego. I have to ask, I don't know if you saw this, but there was an interview that took place a couple of months ago. I want to say it was just before the new year, possibly, where Mark Carney has obviously, by opposition parties and myself, been often called a globalist, an elitist. And he was in an interview and he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, people may call me a globalist and elitist, but that's exactly what Canada needs right now. And I'm just curious your response to that.
Bullshit. Canada, Canadians need to be told the truth and need to be in control of their own destiny and prosperity, and should make their own, make the decision on, what Canadians should make the decision on what they want to do with their own natural resources. They own, right? The natural resources in the ground. And that should be put out, and folks should be asked, honestly, look, we can keep C69, but that will, increase your electricity bill by X. That will increase, fossil fuel access for industrial production by X, and let people decide. It is very authoritarian, and I think very scary. I think it's tyranny. And I just see it as theft to steal or to stop the production of what makes Canada rich and what will guide Canada into a growing economy. So I actually accuse Mark Carney of being anti-democratic.
Well, it would certainly seem that way given how everything has played out. It's pretty odd to have somebody who didn't live in the country for 10 years, has owned a property here, but then decided to move back in early January. And now I'm a Canadian. I'm from here. I know everything. It's unreal. I just have a couple last questions for you here that are going to maybe get a little bit juicier. First and foremost, do you personally believe that there is a climate crisis, that it is the greatest threat to our existence?
Absolutely not. I do believe there's climate change. I think that there have been some adverse, some bad stuff that happened. I also think there's been a lot of good stuff that's happened because of climate change. I think at this point, there is, climate change. But guess what? Climate change has always been happening on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And we as human beings, especially in this day and age, we're wonderful at adapting. And so, let's just say there is a problem. The most important thing is to have the technology to adapt. And remember something, that deaths due to climate disasters, it's down over the last 100 years, it's down 97%. Why? Because we have access to heating, to air conditioning. We can see the forecast of the weather. We can protect ourselves. We have better construction. So no, whichever way you come at it, I do not believe it is currently a problem or a crisis. But again, something, to be aware of. And remember that people are increasingly, why, people say oh, climate change is happening. Look, insurers have premiums have gone up and they're, paying so much more, because of, fires in California or hurricanes in Florida. The reason is not because there are more hurricanes or they're more intense or they're more frequent. It's that
There's
more and
less,
more people.
actually.
Well, more and more people are moving into disaster zones.
Yeah.
That's the reason. So no, absolutely not. I think it's a total hoax.
Sorry, I don't mean to keep you for too long here, but I have to share this because it's relevant. There was a news story 2 years ago out of the province that I live in, and the news had said that there was a record high number of people from the city who died as a result of climate change. And upon reading that, I thought, huh? And so I read the article, and the article was actually about people who were homeless, who very unfortunately passed away because they didn't have shelter, which would probably be a cause of the economy more than anything. So just an interesting point there, the way that they word things to create fear versus the reality of it and the easy fixes to it as well. It's symptom versus cause thinking. The cause here is that our economy is bad. We need to fix that. We don't need all of these other things to waste money on, essentially, that don't fix that root problem. And the root problem is that Canada in many ways has been absolutely landlocked with our resources. We've been told there's no business case, and then Japan signs a $2 trillion with the US for the same thing they came to us asking for a number of years ago. It's incredibly frustrating. It truly is. I have another one here. And I don't actually know if you'll be able to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What exactly do you think is the Achilles heel for people like Mark Carney, these unelected elites that control the world? Like, if you could think of anything that is truly one weakness, what exactly would that be?
Power of the people to speak up. And we saw that in the US. I was a lifelong, Democrat, from New York, a very, Democrat liberal state. I voted for Biden. And then at some point you red pill because you look around and you just say, like, for me, it was after COVID, to say, what the F just happened here? And that's when you start doubting your government, like the authority of the government. And you just open your eyes and you start using common sense. So if you're asking, what is Mark Carney's Achilles heel? It's the power of the people to just revert back to common sense and call dumb shit out. And that's what happened in the US, truthfully. People from such a diverse, socioeconomic backgrounds and experiences just looked around and said, this isn't making any sense. Whether, right, again, you're looking at, green rules, climate rules, you're looking at government overreach and tremendous bureaucracy, crazy DEI and, gender guidelines. And people just woke up to say, like, you know what? Actually, COVID did come from the, COVID lab down the street from that Wuhan lab, right? It wasn't from the a wet market story or whatever. It actually is like what was obvious, right? And people understood that the government was censoring and the government was misleading the public. And that had a profound effect on Americans. And Americans, I think, whatever you think of Trump, right? People very much from all walks of life, from all experiences, just woke up to say, this isn't making sense. And, Harris's policies, which would go further into the Green Deal and DEI. And again, this concept of government reach, of being controlled in every aspect of your life. Americans just woke up to that and said, no, not now, not anymore.
And what exactly do you think is the fallout of ideologies like this? Like, how dangerous is this ideology when imposed on democratic nations such as Canada?
Look at Germany. Okay, so just recently there was a journalist that put up a meme. In Germany, the backdrop, of course, is that the German government has been cracking down on free speech. And a journalist challenged it and just put up a funny meme. And this journalist, just got, I think, 7 months, prison sentence. Now, again, it might be that it's reduced and, there's just a financial penalty. But you look at this stuff where Keir Starmer letting out criminals to make room for folks that are, posting, online, online posts about the two-tier policing system in the United Kingdom, right? Calling this out. And, you're getting a knock on your door in the early hours of the morning and getting arrested. That's horrifying. So, in other countries, such as the United States, there are a lot of problems. But in order to solve those problems, you need to have the bedrock of your democracy and the bedrock to a prospering economy, and that is free speech. And that what's happening in Europe and in the UK, should truthfully terrify Canadians. As again, you've seen the American government, like J.D. Vance, of course, addressed this issue at the Munich Security Conference a couple of months ago.
It was so epic.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And
that was a
that
beautiful
on
speech he gave.
100%. And I think I think we all grew up in a different era, where we had more common sense. There were problems, but we had the ability to debate. We had the ability to disagree. We had the power of the vote to decide what we wanted to do in our country. And I firmly believe that in so many Western countries, that's disappearing. And I'll also bring up open borders, because again, that's a huge issue, that plaguing, all like Western democracies. And, again, Americans had enough and voted to shut down the border. People have a right. I think immigration's wonderful. I'm a foreigner. I live in the United Kingdom, and, there are a lot of legal, procedures you have to go through to be a legal immigrant. I think that everyone's for legal, immigration. Yeah. But, when it comes to people have a right to say, no, we don't want illegal immigration. And we need to have more unity in our society. That should not be silenced. And that is, a big part, of what is happening in Europe, that people who deeply love and care for their country, their community, are being silenced because they're stating the obvious.
So last question here. Let's say Mark Carney wins and he becomes the elected Prime Minister of Canada, of which I have a lot of theories about myself, and how that looks like and how that happened. But where do you see Canada in 5 years?
Electing a new government, a conservative government. I think it's going to be atrocious. And I think Donald Trump is going to beat the shit out of him. I think that, it's like, it's like Carney is flickable. Again, there was some humor in the US, for Trump, saying something positive about Carney or the Liberal Party, only because the Americans will take advantage of this. Right. But as an American, I'm calling it out. Maybe it's best if Carney is in control, because we can continue to get the cheap offtake from Canada, from energy. Right. But truthfully, I have to call it out to say that, no, I deeply care about democratic values and what happens in Canada, as I do about what happens in Europe and the UK. And it's horrific. The economy will flatline. You will vote him out. There will be, very quickly a lot of unrest. You're going to feel it. And the only ones that win here will be your neighbor to the south, the Americans. I don't it's the most ridiculous thing.
We're in an interesting predicament here. And it seems like there's a lot of people who are very intentionally misled. There's a lot of people who are very intentionally omitting the truth. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how that plays out. Thank you again, by the way, Desiree, for joining me for a chat here. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately, we do not have enough time for that today. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I wish Canada the best of luck.